Show of hands. Did anyone make it? Thank you for showing me your hands. Wait for the question. Did anyone make it to Sunrise Yoga? No? Okay. Look at this group. Prioritizing sleep is another way to provide yourself with self-care. So good for you guys. Okay. So we're a couple of minutes behind, so I'm going to flip through some opening remarks, and we're going to get right into it. But I hope you guys had a great time last night. Yeah. Okay. How about Chris Young's story? Was that pretty incredible? Yeah. So, okay, we don't have time for any of that. We got to go. We got to get into this. All right. People have schedules to keep and things to do. So, welcome to FN Summit. This is our 7th annual FN Summit. And welcome. Thank you for traveling far and wide. Thank you for being here. We have people from London, Vienna, Toronto, New York, and Vancouver, and Seattle, and New Jersey. Yeah, Austria. So great group here, and thank you for making the effort. We always like to start here with our vision, and I apologize for the self-referential slide here, but I usually don't deliver this slide. So our vision at Founders Network altogether is lifelong success. Come on. Through peer mentorship. Woohoo! All right, get some more coffee. The values of the community are fourfold. Authenticity. The more open you are, the more we can help. Reciprocity, paying it forward, helping first, sharing your connection, sharing your experience. We're here to help each other. Humility is all about asking for help. It doesn't always come naturally to founders. We like to, or sometimes think we have to have all the answers, but in fact, nobody does anything alone. Nobody's ever done anything alone, right, Tyler? This was our conversation the other day. So ask for help. And then inclusivity, better perspectives, more information, better decisions, better outcomes. That's how I think about it. So we love diversity. We're 11 years old this year, so since our last meeting, we turned 11. Yeah. Amazing. And we wouldn't have gotten this far without our lifetime members. So if you're a lifetime member, please stand up. I'd like to recognize the lifetimers. Round of applause. So these are folks who commit to this vision of lifelong success through peer mentorship. So we're building a support network for this startup, the next one in between, and these people make it real. You guys can sit down now. Thank you. You pay dues once, you never pay dues again. We take that off the table. It's the goal for every member is to become a lifetime member. So if you're not one yet, let's talk about it and find a pathway for you. So thank you. Nearly 60 lifetime members now. So quick FN update. If you recall, last year it was kind of like survival, going back to protect the core. I think I shared I did more calls with members during lockdown than I'd done in years, and it was sort of emerging from lockdown. It was kind of glorious in a way to just be together in person again. This year has been more about growth and laying a foundation for growth and maybe even transformation for the organization. So some pretty exciting updates. So this was the team last year, and I shared we doubled our team, and I was excited that we're sort of coming out of this cockroach mode. And this is the team this year. So we've doubled it again, taken on some debt, and we're growing. And so we have a color-coded org chart. This is David's favorite. And we've got departments. We even have an HR director. So things are getting very official, and we're sort of laying the foundation here to really scale. And it's pretty exciting after 11 years to kind of hit this inflection point. The team has been productive, so it helps to have a big team. So last year I talked about how we had doubled the number of people requesting invites for FN, so building awareness and interest and getting the name out there. And this year I'm excited. Tyler's here. Tyler, raise your hand. He's way on the back there. Tyler Koblasa. Both Tylers, raise your hands. Yeah. Tyler Koblasa is our head of growth, so Tyler's done an excellent job, but we've doubled the number of people requesting invites again this year. So great job, Tyler. The admissions rate's gone from 24% down to 14%. So these are good numbers. If you're a part of a club, you want to be able to say it was easier to get into it when you joined than when the newer groups, newer cohorts are coming in. Yeah, Mike raised his hand there. Mike Mack. So this is the exact same slide I shared last year. We're up about 20% with membership. So more members, more experience, more connections, more value in the network. Last year we had this sort of ambitious scope that we laid out for the year. So coming back to it this year, we talked about launching curriculum, a research program to support that, a seed fund, why not, while we're at it, scaling the chapters, and then paying off a mountain of technical debt with the platform. This year I get to click and put a cross through all of those. So we did, with the team, we made progress on all of these, so I want to sort of share a little bit more about each of those. So we have this goal to get to 25 chapters, a friend in every city, more nodes in the network, more value in the network. Silicon Valley's globalizing, that sort of thing. And so with Omicron and the way the last year worked out, we decided instead of scaling, let's go deeper with the chapters we have. So Dave Plonsky helped out with this. Where's Dave? Way in the back. So Dave had contributed, and we've made some other investments in team and initiatives, and it really paid off. So our chapter leaders really stepped up to the plate. We held a bunch of great happy hours in cities around the world. So top left down to bottom right, we had Seattle, Silicon Valley, DC, Toronto, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Mexico City. So some really awesome events happening all over the world. This is like intrinsically motivating to me. I don't know about you, but I just think it's really neat that we've got this global community and these intimate connections, these enduring connections. So it's pretty cool. And of course, it wouldn't be possible without the chapter leaders. These are volunteers from the membership who make their local ecosystem better. They make FN Global better. They make their profession better. So stand up, chapter leaders. Let's give them a quick shout out. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. Really appreciate it. They say if you want to get something done, you give it to the busiest people, right? All right. Curriculum is another exciting announcement. So this is instructor-led, cohort-based learning. And so we have all of these people coming in with the invite requests who are part-time. They don't quite qualify for membership yet. And then we've got all of these members who are full-time. You have to be full-time to be a member. So we launched a curriculum, part-time to full-time. Look before you leap. It's called Going All In. We're halfway through it right now. There's primary research from the membership. How did you go full-time? What were those pathways? So all these founders from great companies like Amazon and others are in this course learning about how to de-risk that pathway to full-time. So sort of eventually when they finish, we'll qualify for membership. We're going to launch scaling, raising your seed fund next. So the next course will be, if you don't know how to raise seed funding after this, it's not because you don't know how. It's because you have a shitty idea, right? But that's a joke. That stays here. That's just a joke. We're going to teach you how to not have a shitty idea. But there's guest speakers, there's assignments, the students meet outside of the course. It's really cool, really exciting. Executed on that. Probably the biggest thing to announce is that we have a new FN fund. Yeah. So Marian Panich, raise your hand, is my partner on this. And Marian, the way it sort of happened, finished his startup, was getting mentorship from Mike Maples at Floodgate. Maples invested in Twitter and Lyft. And so he was kind of at a kind of crossroads in his career. I was coming up on the 10-year, what's the next decade? And we said, well, let's talk about a fund. And we looked at the last decade. If we had had a fund, what would it have looked like? Well, there's been 2,000 companies that have come through FN. About 10% of those have raised, significant institutional funding, and 1% have had over $3 billion in exits. So there's definitely a there. At the moment, there's 4 unicorns. And these are all unicorns that joined prior to any funding. And then, so that was kind of the first thing. And then we said, okay, well, do people want to be LPs in this? So we reached out to the network, and a bunch of folks are here who said, yeah, I want to be an LP in that. So we've got about 50% of it committed, in fact. We're doing our first close this month. And the minimum for LP is $300K, so $100K a year over 3 years. So it's pretty easy to get in. The interesting thing is, I thought in the beginning that this was a different venture. But then I realized it's actually the natural path for founders. So once you have a successful exit, all of these LPs do, you want to start investing in startups. And who better to invest in than FN startups? And then it's also a natural path for the organization, right? So how can we better support these early stage founders, close that early stage funding gap? So it's really exciting. This is where most of my time's been going. It's why we have that big org chart, so Mario and I can go heads down on this. And if you're interested in being an LP, or we're not yet quite investing if you're a startup yet, but we'll be doing that soon, and we'll be sharing more about how that process works. And that's my big update there. So looking ahead, we'll be operating that fund. We'll have about 30 investments by the end of next year. We'll finish fundraising for it. We'll launch that new course around raising seed fund. We'll be scaling up the existing courses, expanding the chapter program. So again, continue to go deep, go wide with chapters. And then platform performance and chat. So we've paid off a mountain of technical debt in the last year. It was super painful. We're really looking forward to improving performance. I know as members, you really suffer from that, and I hear about it. And we'll have chat. I promise you we will do something around chat, whether it's Slack, built into the app, something. And Marianne, I haven't told you about this yet, but we're going to do that. Okay. All right. So with that, welcome officially again to FN Summit 2022, our 7th annual summit. It's a chance to step away from the startup grind. It's a chance to reflect on where you've been, where you're going. And really, it's what Founders Network is all about. It's all about deep relationship building, long-term, enduring relationship building, peer mentorship, lifelong success through peer mentorship. But as with anything, at 7 years, there's this thing, the 7-year mark, where you kind of go, God, this is a lot of work. You know, if you have been any commitments and you hit the 7-year mark, you know what I'm talking about. You kind of ask yourself, why am I doing this? And I sort of had this existential moment. So I reached out to some members, formed a sort of summit committee of folks who keep coming back, some folks who hadn't been yet but wanted to. And I asked them, like, why are we doing this? And is this something we want to continue to do for the next 7 years? And so this is kind of like some of the words, some of the phrases they said. So they said, led to friends forever after, led to funding, authenticity, good connection, led to lifetime membership. It's safe, open, honest, unfiltered. There's that speaker wisdom you get to apply. It's cathartic to get to vent about the challenges you're having. Amazing people, values aligned, building relationships. Unlike any other event, intimacy. And the best was life-changing. So, I don't know, that was enough for me. So I was like, all right, let's do this. So, thank you to the Summit Committee. Maybe Summit Committee, go ahead and stand. Some people are standing up lots of times, but go ahead one more time. So, if you have thoughts on how we can, improve what worked well, I love Kaizen, let the Summit Committee know, and we're going to debrief after all of this. So the theme of Founders Network is growth. Growth as a founder, growth as a startup. And we have sort of 2 content areas. So this year, the startup growth, we're going to talk about fundraising, product development, startup partnerships. That's today. Tomorrow is about mental health, company culture, growing your team. So these are kind of our 2 sort of content themes. We've got amazing speakers, the best speakers we've had yet, multiple billions in collective exit value, probably over 50 companies founded, IPOs, one of the few women to lead an IPO. And yeah, let's hear it for that. Yeah. And I'm super grateful for the speakers, and thank you for being here and taking the time to share with us. Awesome facilitators, so Kevin, Amy, and Thomas, at your meal times, they'll be facilitating these content themes. And amazing partners. So Dave's also helped on the partnership side with FN, and we've got some partners here. Partners, stand up if you're present, and just so people know who you are. Okay? All right, so take a good look at the partners. They're going to be doing office hours this afternoon, one-on-one. So if you want to talk about legal, recruiting, HR, finance, accounting, recruiting, Salesforce channel, development, web development, and team building, culture, and all these things, they're here to talk to you about that. We've lost our venue in years past due to wildfires, right? 1 week before the summit one year, I smelled smoke through my window, and my wife said, "You better check on the map up there." I said, "Oh, it'll be fine." Burned to the ground. So we scrambled and we went to Carmel, and we're back here in Napa, and so far so good. Even this venue part of it almost burned down one year. So just wanted to say 205 trees have been planted, that we're putting some of that to offset this conference and the carbon footprint. All right, and then so getting right into it, just to rehash last night, Sabraj with Tyler, team who was it? Team Parachute and Team Yugoslavia, I think, took the cake. Monty, who I thought was fantastic, talking about beginning with the end in mind, and then again Chris with his journey from a life imprisonment to being pardoned with the help of Kim Kardashian, former President Trump, and now doing his startup Like You for mental health for inmates. Okay, so with that, I'm going to bring up Adrian Garcia. Adrian is our new chapter director for Los Angeles. He's a pretty new member, about a year and a half, but he's been super energetic. Those LA people can be sort of laid back, and Adrian is helping change that. And so let's give a round of applause for Adrian.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin, for that wonderful intro. Wonderful event here. I'm here to introduce David Berry. So David has been the founding member of the Leadership Council for the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And he's also co-authored the Solution Development Goal at that organization. He's the advisory trustee of the Hackley School and a former member of the MIT Corporation. He was elected a 2014 Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. And he was named Innovator of the Year by the Technology Review and received the prestigious Lemelton MIT Student Prize for Innovation and Innovation. He was selected by the US State Department as one of 12 innovators helping to reshape reality. And he has an MD from Harvard Medical and his PhD from MIT in biological engineering. David, come on up. Thank you.
You need to switch mics. Steven, you want one of those?
You have preference?
All good? Okay.
All right. I was told one of these mics was for like if everyone's paying attention, and the other is if everyone is going to sleep. I'm trying to figure out which one it is, and we'll see which dynamic we need. So maybe if I start talking my somnolent voice, I'll start switching. Anyways, first let me just comment. I don't know who the hell took that picture, but we'll leave that aside. So let me just start out. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my entrepreneurial journey, but it's not meant to be about me. It's more meant to be about sort of some of the experiences along the way, and hopefully some of it can be informative and instructive of what not to do, if I can put it that way. So appreciate the introduction. I trained as an MD PhD, and I learned very early in that course that I probably was not cut out to go to school. And so my second month of medical school, I was sitting in the back of class. So I resonate with everyone who's in the back of the room. I heard a professor, member of the National Academy of Sciences, talk about something, and I walk up to him after class, and I said, you know what, I think the science you described is right, but the application you have, it just will not work. So I'm happy to get into the details of it, but basically what the guy wanted to do was stop the way that you monitor the progression of diabetes without providing for a treatment. And I said to him, look, I think I have a better idea of what we can do, and I'd like to take you out to lunch, and let's talk about it. So reality was, I didn't have a better idea. I had no idea. I just knew there had to be one. And so I think this is probably lesson one that all entrepreneurs learn, right? Which is that you have an instinct that you're trying to do something, and a lot of your act is trying to figure out how to find where it's ultimately going. So I'll tell you what the journey was here, which was, took him out to lunch. At the time, Google wasn't the thing that we used, it was Alta Vista, so I guess that makes me older. So I Alta Vista'd, if that was ever a verb, in the back of the classroom, and found out that this thing that he was working on was really useful, potentially, for removing carcinogens from cigarette smoke. So I proposed to him, as a second-month medical student, to a National Academy member, that we start a cigarette company. Funny thing was, he agreed. And we kicked off an effort and raised $12.5 million over the course of a couple of months. Now, this is the thing I want to get into, right? Because the founder ride from the outside is a glamorous ride. The founder ride from the inside is one where you're constantly getting kicked in the teeth, and you have to continue to smile the whole way. And so the reality of how we raised that money was and this is the year 2000, when like you could probably just write period and 3 letters, and you get everything funded for double-digit millions of dollars, right? And a big pre-money. Now, we weren't smart enough to do that, so we went to 33 venture capitalists. We got laughed out of every single room because who starts a cigarette company? And so how did we raise $12.5 million? We raised it from 200, quote, friends and family. Now, my family, not that big, and I don't know that I have that many friends. So I think that's just a fancy way of saying we networked our way to a lot of angel checks, and it was a lot of work, but we got it done. And had the good fortune of building the company. And again, I'm going to give you the public speak and then the private speak. And took it public 12 months later. We were one of the first companies to go public, probably the first company to go public right after the dot-com crash. And we went from raising that $12.5 million to taking it public for about 140. And again, this is 1 year into medical school that this was happening. So, as I said, I was not the right fit for medical school. Now, part of what was going on in this was we cut a deal with RJ Reynolds, one of the big cigarette companies, where they wanted to buy our material to put into cigarette filters. And what we learned along the way was cigarette companies, and you can quote me on this, are assholes. So we had cut a deal where we needed to make a certain amount of material, and we needed to deliver it at a certain purity, right? The precise purity level that we needed to hit was 94%. We delivered our batch, and it was 93.8% pure. They canceled the contract. And now, for anyone who's dealt with these sorts of companies, it's not a surprise, because what a lot of companies do in these situations is they look for a way out, and they look to screw you, right? And it is what it is. And sorry, unfortunately, what you're going to get from me is I'll tell you what I actually think. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to tell you what I actually think. And it turns out someone in the lab, because this is how I think companies get built, right? This is the thing that people don't talk about. Someone figured out that this material we were putting into cigarettes, if you put it into toilet paper, it increases wet strength and biodegradability. I don't know what the hell that person was doing, right? But they figured that out. I've never asked the question. I don't want to know. But anyways, we then cut a contract with Kimberly-Clark. We start selling it at $20 a pound. That got us revenue. We were able to go public on it. And the company turned out to be successful for quite some time. And what happened for me was I got bit by the entrepreneuring bug. And so started a series of companies, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But one of the things that I think is really important about the entrepreneurial journey is your best laid plans are not the journey of the company. And one of the keys of the founder is to recognize when you get that impetus for change. Sometimes you're slapped across the face by it. Sometimes you have to look for it. Because when you think about it, right, you have an idea, you have a passion, you're focusing on that journey, but you're going to learn something new along the way. And you have to be very open to recognizing what that new thing is and see it when you can see it. Now, from there, I ended up starting a couple of companies while I was in medical school. I think I would have probably killed my mother if I dropped out of medical school. So I figured out one of the advantages of the medical school I went to is they give you a gentleman's B, which means unless you punch your professor in the face or sleep with their significant other, you probably graduate. So I didn't do either, and I graduated. So technically, I'm a doctor, which means, by the way, if anyone gets sick here, I know how to call 911. But that's about the extent of what I would trust me with from a medical perspective. And so what I ended up doing was I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as a job, right? The natural thing if you go to medical school and you don't go to do a residency is you're supposed to become a professor, or so they tell you, right? So I went and I got a professorship offer. It was really exciting. And then my PhD thesis advisor calls me one night, it's 11 p.m., a guy named Bob Langer, who's very well respected, and he says, David, I've been doing some thinking. I'm like, okay, good. He says, you're not going to get tenure. So what goes through my head? You're an asshole. What comes out of my mouth? Oh, tell me, why do you say that, right? And he said, well, here's the issue. Because he said, right now I see you as someone who wants to start a lot of companies, and professors are not looked fondly upon for starting a bunch of companies. You have to understand that tenure is social, and it's not just about performance. So you'll probably have all the execution, but you're going to screw up on the social and you're never going to get tenure. It's like, okay, fine, you're right. So I decided to go and look for a job. Now, I didn't know what to do because this was a little bit sudden, and I was trying to think, hey, do I go start a company? Do I go do something else? I literally found what every job does and asked a bunch of people how do they spend their days. And along the way, I got connected to a firm then called Flagship Ventures. And I met the CEO. He asked me what I thought of venture capitalists. I told him what I thought, which is, I think venture capitalists are the stupidest people in the room. They like to take credit for other people's ideas, act like they're their own, and make money when they do relatively little work while improving their golf game. Very apropos. So he laughed and really enjoyed that and said, do you want a job? I said, what part of my answer did you not understand? So what he said is, no, I actually don't want you to do that. I want to give you an open checkbook. I want you to invent technologies, and I want us to start companies together on it because I like the way you think. And so we often call that an EIR, an EIR position. But he said, but I also like the way you think that I want you to invest as well. I'm like, okay, I know nothing about investing. Perfect, that's great. So I joined, and I did what any good MD PhD does, and I started an energy company, right? Because that's what my background was in. Started a company that was called LS9. Started out in the Bay Area. One of the things I learned, this is in '05, is running a company from Boston in San Francisco, hard. Zoom wasn't a thing at the time. So a lot of frequent flyer miles. For those of you who like on delay in the airport, I think statistically it stays in your stomach 9 out of 10 times. That's at least my experience from eating it before flights, but we'll leave that aside. Probably not a detail you wanted to hear. Anywho, so started that company. I won't get into too many of the details on it, but it ended up becoming a very fast-growing company in the energy space. Started it out of the back of the Kleiner Perkins office in Coastal Ventures. And what was an interesting experience was every company I'd started beforehand, which was probably about 6, all the money I raised was from friends and family because that's what I learned, right? And I knew how to do that. And one of the tricks is once you make money for people, they want to give you more money because they think you're going to do it again. So it was easy to do that. But then I was getting into the venture world. I'd never raised venture money. So, I've read all the books, right? And who you're supposed to go to raise money in the mid-aughts? Kleiner Perkins. So where did I go? I went down to Sand Hill Road and figured out where Kleiner Perkins was, figured out my way into the door. And I didn't raise money from Kleiner. But what was interesting was we got a commitment from Vinod Khosla, who at the time was transitioning out, to fund the company. And he asked me to go build the company in his office, which for awkwardness was in the back of Kleiner Perkins at the time, as he was breaking up with John Doerr. Wow. So this was an entertaining experience. One of my favorite experiences, and I'm a young-ish 27, I like to say I was a young, cocky 27-year-old. I think the 27 part has changed, the young has changed. The other part probably not. We'll leave that aside. But in Kleiner, because they're very focused on cutting costs and being frugal and efficient with capital, they had this glamorous lunch they would serve to everyone who's in the office every day. Like literally, like you can imagine like Thanksgiving dinner on like a random Tuesday. And so I did what I did, and because I saw free food, walked up to it, and I got yelled at by John Doerr, which was a wonderful experience very early in your career. Like, I don't know if this is going to make it, and he's like, "Get that out of my office," right? I was like, "I'm not in your office. I'm just having some lunch," and Vinod's back at me. But anyways, we started this company, and one of the great experiences along the way was, we coupled the journey of starting in an era where this field was just emerging with the sort of entrepreneurial bent, if you will, of, we have to do something to change the world for the better, coupled with the fact that we have no freaking idea whether this thing is going to work. So what we were really trying to do was basically engineer bacteria to convert sugar into drop-in replacement petrochemicals. And all the science said it wouldn't work, right? So we ended up going through the path. We raised $5 million in our first round. Long story short, company did well, ultimately got bought, is what it is. But along the way, I started a couple more companies and got into fights with John Doerr about investing into companies. So I have a lot of positive experiences that I can share about our relationship over the past few years. But one of the things that I learned across the path of LS9 and then some of the next companies, Juul and whatnot, is the journey of starting companies is really similar, right? Just about every company gets built in almost the same way. And so in 2009, I sat with Nubar, the CEO of Flagship, and I said, why don't we start getting a lot more systematic about this? Because I can start a company or two a year, but I think we can scale this thing. So we launched something called Venture Labs. And what we did was we took all the principles from all the companies that we built, and we created a schema by which we would launch companies. A 4-step model. And I'll walk through exactly what we do. I don't have any slides on it, but I can show a slide if you want to see it. It'll just be like random balls and dots and things like that, and it won't be that useful. But what we realized is there's a set of problems that entrepreneurs face along the way, and there's a set of errors that entrepreneurs make along the way, and we wanted to overcome those and engineer a system that overcomes these problems. So the way we think about this model is 4 stages. We think about it as exploration, proto-company, new company, growth company. Very straightforward. What's an exploration? Well, we start with a question. Right? Everyone thinks the question is important. It's not. But let me explain what we do. Right? So we start with a question. Question could be anything. And then we spend about 6 weeks separating truth from belief. This is super important. And then we spend about 6 weeks forming a set of hypotheses. So let me walk through this, right? As I said, everyone thinks the question is really important. All the question is a starting point. That's all it is. And you have to, and I think it's really important to remember this. Where I like to focus these is on things that are funny to me, or things that don't make sense. Because if things don't make sense, they're probably wrong. So those just turn out to be really interesting spaces. Then what we do, as I said, is we spend 6 weeks figuring out truth versus belief. What do I mean by that? Well, most of what I've done is in the scientific community. And when you look at how science is managed, right, in order to get published, you have to say other people are really smart, meaning you have to cite them in your papers. Now, one of the most cited papers, this is an example, is this paper from the year 2000 by Hahnemann and Weinberg, which is on how cancer forms, right? Anyone who's written a paper in biology has cited this paper. Most people haven't read it, right? This is reality, is people don't read these things. So when you look at what this paper has been attributed to, like anything in cancer, this paper apparently has said. But the paper is a very simple paper that says there's 6 things that drive cancers, right? And this is from 2000, so it's an antiquated view on that. It's still getting the credit for that today. Why? Because this is the way people are trained in the field. Fields get filled with dogma. Because if you're a young professor in cancer and you go against Weinberg, you're not getting funded. And this is really important to recognize. So what happens in fields is things that were said by someone famous get believed in fields even though they're not real. Let me give you a few examples of this. We're told often, kindergartners are told this, that we use 3% of our brains. Ever wonder where that comes from? So it turns out in the 1850s, a bunch of German scientists took some rats, stabbed them in the head with a bunch of blunt instruments, and found that in about 3% of the spaces, they could see a change in the rat, outside of the fact that it probably died, right? So therefore, humans use 3% of their brains. Now, reality is, fMRI scanners have been used, like in the last decade, more, further than that, and they show that the brain's all active, right? And evolution's pretty efficient. It gets rid of things that you don't use. So why would we have a brain when we only use 3% of it? But yet we're all taught this. Another example, cancer is caused by genetic mutation, right? Everyone is taught this, and probably you all think I'm crazy for saying this. Well, it turns out there's a type of cancer called an ependymoma. It's a pediatric cancer. Never a genetic mutation ever seen in this cancer. So how can cancer be caused by it if certain cancers never have genetic mutations? You might say, who cares? That's an esoteric case. Well, Harvey Lodish at the Whitehead 10 years ago showed that he could make cancers without single genetic mutations of all sorts. Now what are we coming up on? Interesting new facts that you can take advantage of. So what do we get here? We get a fact base. Then we start using that fact base because we have the right fact base by making sure we can separate truth from belief. And then what we can do is we can start asking questions. Now, the trick of what we do is we form hypotheses. We just create long lists of hypotheses of what we can do with this. And here's the trick that we do here. We use the second most renewable resource in the world, people's willingness to tell you how bad your idea is. And we basically go around to a bunch of people and we share these ideas, knowing that we're not going to execute on it, and we ask them everything that's wrong with it, right? And the wonderful thing is when you ask people what's wrong, they will tell you everything that's wrong with your idea. You get a ton of information out of that. Now, what starts happening is that as you bring all this together, you start coalescing it, you start realizing the idea process moves you in a direction. And it consolidates down to a single hypothesis. So then what we do is we prototype it. Now, here's a fundamental issue, and I know every founder can relate to this in one form or another, even though most of us never want to admit it, right? There's a phase where you're dealing with a critical question that is a binary on the life of the company that you're trying to build. And you don't want it to be negative, because if it's negative, you go home. And none of us want to go home, right? And it could be that we promised our mother-in-law that we were going to have a good job, and now we have to be embarrassed because we no longer have a job, or we have to give up on our idea. So we often don't ask that question. Now, the reason that we prototype it is to avoid this exact problem. And this is the point that I want to make, is you got to embrace that point, which is you actually want to make your company fail really early, because there's one resource that you have that's not renewable, which is time. Everything else, for all intents and purposes, is renewable. And so my view is drive your company to failure really early if you're going to drive it to failure, right? Ask that critical question. Force yourself to embrace it. So we spend 6 months, no more than $500,000, and we try to kill the company. Now, when we fail to kill the company, which is about half the time, we then launch what's called a NewCo. And we call it a NewCo because that's when we actually view that we can get going. Yeah, go ahead.
Why do you try to kill it?
Machetes, no. So usually I find if since all of what we're doing is science-based in some form or another, we'll get a lab, we'll hire like 2 or 3 techs, and we'll try to ask that one question where we can look at it and say, if this were not to be true, would it invalidate the hypothesis? Sorry for like the triple negative I put in there. But we try to look for that really key piece of what is at the essence of what we're doing. So there's no single answer to it, right? Because if you want to make a product, if you're making a product and you're trying to sell to an audience, one of the best ways to do it is actually figure out, from my perspective, is will they pre-purchase it from you? Right? Now, most people will say, no, they'll never pre-purchase it because they want to see the product, they want to see that it's going to work, they want to see that it's built. But here's the issue. If you're solving a problem that they care about, they'll invest in the solution. And many are actually willing to write a conditional check, or at least a note of conditional purchase. And that's the thing where you can actually embrace that and recognize that if you can't sell it, and I'm going to just assume, despite the fact that we talked about some people having shitty ideas, sorry, I'm just going to assume for the sake of discussion that you can sell, right? But that's what I'm getting at, is you got to find what that killer moment is. Again, there's no single solution on that. But so when we go start the NewCo, one of the things that we're very intentional about is we put a very precise amount of money in, and we have a very precise timeline that we operate on. And what we try to do there is we try to expand out the idea as big as we can. Now, the reason I talk about it in this way is our model is to do this serially. So at some point, I fire myself as the CEO. Mostly I find myself incompetent, and so I try to fire myself not for cause so I can retain my options. No, sorry. But what it is ultimately to get to scale is I got to get myself out of the job, right? But this part, I stay as the CEO very intentionally. And so statistically, this phase will last 18 months plus or minus 1. We'll hire 23 people plus or minus 2. It's surprisingly precise. And what we're doing is we're running a set of experiments to figure out how broad we can make the idea and figure out where the essence is. Usually around 9 to 12 months in, something funny happens. And this is what I was getting at with a bit of the cigarette story. But we realize that this is actually engineered into the way that we develop these companies, where an experiment comes back and the data is not what you expected. Usually the first instinct of the staff is to bury the experiment because they think you're going to get pissed. And the reality is now we're starting to learn what we're actually doing. And that's the time when it's time for management to engage. Now, here's the trick on this, right? So when you raise a venture round, right, everyone talks about getting a syndicate and everyone wants the blue chip names. One of the things that they don't tell you is that your syndicate is only as strong as your weakest player. This is really important because when you raise a round and something funny happens, if your weakest player is skittish or you happen to be in a bad economy, not that I've ever seen a bad economy ever, then they start getting into modes of, well, this isn't what we invested in. Oh, let's go shut this down, right? And so when you have venture syndicates and you have groups that are looking around, then the question is, how do you make sure that you're executing and executing right? So we make sure we oversee it during that period so that we can actually make the change, embrace the opportunity that's there. And so the reason I'm saying this is I think it's really important for founders to recognize that this is part of the journey, and you need to set yourself up to see the change, embrace the change, make it part of your story, and not set yourself up in an environment where you can't have the opportunity to embrace what you're learning. And then only after that do we hit go, bring in the CEO, then raise real money for these things, and we're off to the races. So I spent about 15 years doing that, started about 35 companies. I've had ranges of success and failure. The more interesting stories are usually failure because success is, it looks great in papers, but, or in the newspaper, but it's not really the reality that most of us live on a day-to-day basis. So happy to talk about any of those pieces, but then something fun happened, which was I turned 40. And I think the reality is whenever we get that 0, it's sort of like going to, when you hit that 7-year mark, but when you have a 0 in your age, you start asking questions of, hey, am I doing the right thing, right? And although I was told that the journey is you're supposed to be a founder, then you become an investor, apparently I started as an investor, and but I decided to step out of my role and started a company. So I started a company called Valo Health, and I won't tell you too much about the company because it doesn't really matter, but we launched the company in 2019. Turns out to be not a bad time to launch a company, as well as an awful time to launch a company. And the good news, bad news is I've started a few companies, so I kind of know how to do some of this, how to raise money, and let me come back and talk about that in a second. And we've been on a meteoric rise, which has been great. So we raised an $100 million A, a $300 million B. We signed up a transaction in 2021, last year, feels like eons ago, to raise $550 million in a SPAC pipe transaction with Coastal Ventures that would have had us go public at a $2.8 billion transaction, or a $2.8 billion post. We're a 2-year-old company at the time. Our revenues were this, right? You want to know if there was a bubble? I mean, that's nuts, right? So we did something crazy, and I want to touch on a couple points in this journey, which is we walked from that SPAC. And I think we were written up as the first company to actually walk from a fully baked SPAC pipe. Now, part of the thing that was kind of cool is the Wall Street Journal keeps writing about that we broke this thing up. But the cool thing is they now say it was a $750 million transaction. Easiest $200 million I've ever raised. So that was really exciting. Now, one of the things is, when I talk about some of the journey about fundraising, because a lot of times when you think about the entrepreneurial journey, it's about how do I raise money? How do I get the company started? How do I get people to back my idea, right? It always feels easy when you talk about big numbers, right? Because it's like, oh, well, you've started 35 companies, so it must have been easy. Well, the reality is, to me, all fundraising is the same, right? Which is, there's a story there. Everyone is trying to figure out why your story sucks. Let me say this, right? The reason I'm saying it this way is that when you think about what a venture capitalist's job is, right? And I've always found this to be some of the most useful advice I've gotten over my career, which is when you actually think about what someone's job is at their core, you understand their motivations. A venture capitalist is paid to say no to 99.7% of opportunities. So what are they doing every time they hear you? They're trying to figure out how to say no. They're not trying to figure out what the best idea is, right? And when you think about how a venture capitalist is incented, right? And this is really important to understand who you're dealing with on the other end, right? So you're usually dealing with a young person because the partner, was too busy. They scheduled the meeting, but then at the last second they had something come up. Golf game, right? By the way, in 2005, when I was just getting started in this whole thing, I decided to go to the National Venture Capital Association annual meeting in San Diego, which, by the way, everyone got food poisoning at. It was amazing. Great way to treat venture capitalists. Last time I've ever had past sushi. Anyways, one of the things is they had a session for the young venture capitalists in the room so we could all be educated in the ways of being a venture capitalist. Some guy gets up on stage, this is being recorded so I'll protect who it actually is, and says, well, making partners trivial. All you gotta do is have a nice pair of irons. Not making it up. I'm like, okay, that's apparently the industry. But what I actually learned is when you think about how a young person makes partner in venture capital, there's one of two things they do. They either carve out a unique niche, become the player in that niche, and convince the firm that they want to keep that niche, or, said a different way, they create a book of business where every partner is willing to give up some of their incentive to share it with that person because they'll make more money, right? So when you think about it from that perspective, what is the person that you're talking to looking for? Well, they want a sure ticket to make money. They don't care what problem you're solving. They don't care if it's sustainable or green or any of that sort of stuff, regardless of what the firm's mantra says. They want to know, how is this predictable that I make money? And what timeline are they on? Well, how long does an associate want to take to make partner? They want to do it in 2 years. The average life cycle for them to do it is 7 years. So what do they need to see? They need a 5x in 3 years. So your job is to tell them exactly how they will see a 5x in 3 years. And all the things you hear about on how to make slides and all of that, what's the TAM, what's your success rate, all of that, all of it is meant to create the logical and prescriptive path of 5x in 3 years. Now, how's that different from a Series A and a Series B? It's not. How's that different from a seed and a pre-seed? It's not. Every investor wants a 5x in 3 years. There's nothing magic to it. Now, how do you create confidence? Well, if you've done it before, people think you can do it again. That helps. If you haven't, the more explicitness you have around how you get there, the better. The more explicitness you have about the risks, the better. How you overcome those risks, the better. And then really everything becomes the decoration around the explicitness of 5x in 3 years. So why were we able to raise $100 million? It wasn't because I knew a bunch of people. It was because I convinced some people we were going to get them a 5x in 3 years. When we raised our $300 million B, it was the same thing. And what's interesting now, because economic downturns bring these out, and I can share more about this company than I ordinarily would, because we had an S4 that went public with the SEC, so there's a lot of information that's public around us. So our Series B post was a $1.15 billion valuation, which is what we raised $300 million on. We weren't going to complain. After we took apart the SPAC, we had to go raise money in the private markets. Now, sometimes it's really nice to say, hey, it took us 18 months to go from zero to a unicorn. But then when this market happens, then you have to protect your status, because otherwise you're screwing your early shareholders. And my view is part of your job as a CEO is to protect all of your shareholders, not your most recent shareholders, all of your shareholders. And your shareholders include not just your Series A and Series B investors, but your employees. And that's really important to remember. So when you get into an environment like this, then price becomes a burden. And the reason I put it that way is, well, you still have to deliver 5x in 3 years. And so if you're sitting there at that kind of valuation, now people want to say, wait a second, in 3 years, are you going to be a $7 billion company? And that's still what you have to deliver conviction on. So let me just get into a couple of more specific points on that, because to me, fundraising is no more simple and no more complicated than that. And I might sound way too easy when I put it that way, but no one cares how pretty your slides are. No one cares, whether you have, I think you had the hockey stick. No one cares whether you actually have a projected hockey stick, because we all make up numbers, right? That's what we do in these charts. Yours were real, I know, because they were retrospective. But the reality is, everything is all those sorts of numbers are, we all know that the future projections are fake. They're not fraud. It's just there's no way to know. So really what they want to understand is, how do you get that conviction? How do you get all of that locked in? But then there's the act of how do you actually go and build the company? And one of the things I really like about environments like this, despite the fact that I said that fundraising gets harder, is that they actually force you to remember how you build your company, right? So to me, there's 3 things that you have to focus on constantly in the company: value drivers, expense management, and fundraising. And those 3 are not separable. So in a market like this, it forces you to consolidate very efficiently down to the question of, what is it exactly that we use to create value? Why are we doing anything that's not those value drivers? How do you manage your expenses so that you can focus everything on those value drivers? And how do you fundraise the right amount in these sorts of environments? So, one of the things that I kind of enjoy talking about, especially with founders, is that, again, while there's glamour and glory on the outside, right? Especially if it goes well, the day-to-day of this is tough. So when we took apart the SPAC pipe, we didn't know that this market was going to happen in the way that it did. Like, I get told by every single investor, "Oh, we saw this market coming a while ahead of time." So I asked them what they did with their personal accounts, right? Did you shift, everything out of equities into bonds, or put it all into, the dollar or whatever? Oh, no, I didn't do anything. Okay, so you lost 40% of your life savings, but you saw the market coming. Brilliant. And I want you to invest in this company? Why? Right? Sorry.
No, you're right.
So the reason, so everyone says they saw it. Now, we didn't see that. We just knew we needed to give ourselves flexibility, because once you do something that is unique, you don't know how people are going to perceive you. So what did we do? We cut our expenses, and we went into 2021 or 2022, sorry, with an $155 million budget. We proactively cut that to 105. We went in expecting to be 250 people at the end of the year. We decided we would end the year at 170. And we've been very intentional about that. One of the things they don't tell you is, when you're planning to go public and you're on your hiring ramp, there's a lot of people who want to join the company to make a quick buck, right? They don't believe in your culture. They don't believe in your mission. So we put in place a set of tools to, how do I put it, allow those people to find a home that's more suited to what they're looking for. And we turned over about 30% of the company. And it was great because it tightened up our culture. It got us into a really strong position. Our operations have improved in their efficiency. We're scaling our revenues way more than we did before when we had zero. So now we have some. It's exciting. But by doing those moves proactively, right, you can sit in these environments and actually have flex to make sure that we can raise the right kind of capital. You have the ability to manage the company in the right way. And everyone always talks about the sort of CEO is a lonely job. I actually don't find that to be true because everyone wants to tell you how to do your job, right? It's just you're stuck there with the one who has to make the decision. But being able to consolidate everything to that simple balance of value drivers, expense management, and fundraising allows you to consolidate the way you think about things into the 3 drivers of what you're responsible for. And in environments like this, there's really nothing else that you have to think about, right? Well, except for team. And so I'll just comment on that briefly, which is to say, the other thing that's really useful in these sorts of environments is they force you to take those rules around how to build teams much more seriously, right? How do you hire for shared values first and jobs to be done second? Now, everyone always says it the other way around, but it's all about values first and jobs to be done second. Now, the cool thing about these sorts of environments is they force you to get quite aggressive when people are not fitting that mold. Now, in my experience, when I've known I had to terminate someone, I hold on to them for 6 months too long. And I think everyone does this, although I tell myself that to make myself feel better and sleep better at night. But again, part of the value that you have now is you can be ruthless in your own thinking and say, hey, do I have the right team around me? And I'd say this is a great time to be able to be very direct around that, right? So what I love celebrating in environments like this is it gets you to be truly honest and at the core with what you're trying to do. Now, I want to just jump into one situation briefly, and then I'm going to pause and open it up for questions and whatever dialogue you guys want to have. We faced a really interesting decision last year, which I already told you what the answer was of what we chose to do, which was around what to do with the SPAC pipe. So we signed up a deal. It was with Coastal Ventures. This story has a little bit of symmetry. I started in the back of their office. We're doing a SPAC pipe together, whatever. And we signed up this deal. It's getting a lot of positive traction. Signed it up in April of last year. We went out, we raised $200 million in the pipe. We got a lot of great traction. We're very happy about it. Then something funky happens right around August, right? Which was, there were like 400 bajillion SPACs that were raised. And so various investors did not ignore that fact. And there's a group of investors, arbitrage investors, who saw the structure of a SPAC. So a SPAC, for those of you who don't know, basically it's a shell company, but there's a bunch of little features in there, which is you're supposed to do a merger with something. The price of that merger is at $10 a share. If they can't do a merger in 2 years, everyone gets their monies back at $10 a share. So if you're an ARB investor, this is brilliant, right? Because if somehow that SPAC can trade below $10, there's free money to be made. So all these ARB funds seem to figure it out all at once. I don't know if they talk to each other, but somehow they all figured it out all at once. And what they started doing was investing in every single SPAC that was out there and cycling shares at the millions of share level, somewhere between 960 and 997. These guys were printing money by doing this thing. They couldn't care what the company that was being merged with was doing, and it worked for every single company except for the SPAC that Donald Trump was trying to do. So my hair's not nearly as good as his, although maybe in that picture. So yeah, that's probably and some hair dye. What we ended up seeing was, we, like everyone else, we were getting pulled into that. And what happens is the fundamental investors who you thought you were getting as part of the SPAC leave. Because they see what the dynamic is. They don't want to stick around for it. So they're out. Okay. Well, that means what's going to happen at the back end, you get what's called a redemption. So the way SPACs work is all the people who hold on the SPAC side have a choice 2 days before it happens to just pull out of the deal and not give you their money, and they get their money back at $10 a share. Cool deal, right? but they can also vote at the same time whether or not the deal should go forward. So what these ARBs would do is they'd say, deal should go forward, but we want our money back. Seems like they should be tied together. They're not. Anyways, that's the way these things work. So we saw that that was going to happen, right? That was happening to everyone. I didn't need someone to give us a crystal ball. You could tell that that was exactly what was going to happen. Now, when you run the math on that, what happens? Well, that means you've created, prior to the fact that you've gone there, a tremendous drive to sell your shares, right? That's going to drive your shares down on your first day of trading, probably to about $6 from $10. Then your pipe investors are going to get pissed off because now they've taken a 30% haircut after being locked up with their capital for a little while. They're going to try to sell, and now you're sitting there with a $3 stock. And one of the things that no one tells you until you're stuck in it is that once the market has you as a stock that's lost 70%, it's really hard to recover. Analysts start hating you, the market starts hating you, they forget you, and it's really hard, even when you reprove your fundamentals, to recover. And so we said, you know what? We see that this is going to happen. We spent 3 months trying to engineer every single situation to figure out how we could solve it, and we couldn't solve it, so we walked. Now, the issue that we had at the time was people hadn't walked late in the process before. And so one of the challenges that we were looking at is how do you do something unprecedented? You know deep down the right answer. Your company, your employees are all expecting that you're going to go public, right? And it's a big moment of anticipation. Your investors are seeing a potential for an exit, and you got to sit there and make that decision of saying, you know what, the right thing to do is to not do this thing that we've all been working really hard for 6, 7, 8 months for. And one of the things that I found is the more you do this, the fewer mentors and fewer advisors you really have, because everyone has a stake in what you're trying to do, and there's very few honest brokers that you have. And so one of the things I've always found is how do you make sure, even though you can keep, quote, mentors around, how do you have at least one honest broker? And the one that I was able to find, who I'm happy to use their name, happened to be a guy by the name of David Gluckman, who works at a bank called Lazard. They weren't part of our banking syndicate. They don't do this kind of work, so he had nothing in the fight. And I had him do a set of analyses for us and asked him his advice, and he was the only person that said matter-of-factly to walk from this thing. And it was super useful to find that honest broker, because then I could go around and have the conversation with the investors and saying, do you want a $3 stock or a private stock, right? Very easy answer. Talking to the employees, obviously a different story, but we made the decision, and what's been great is we've been very happy about it ever since, because every other company that's gone public around the time we would have is a $3 stock. And so we know with the benefit of hindsight, our analysis was right, and we know we made the right decision, and while it was tough at the time, no one is second guessing it. But let me stop there. I've spoken for a while, and probably someone in the back of the room has found a pillow, and is this better? Is this thing on? No, but happy to open it up and talk about anything that's useful, dive into anything, answer any questions, or get out of the way if I'm boring everyone. But go ahead.
Just back to this SPAC conversation, and I want to be sure that I'm really understanding what this journey was. So I thought I heard we had all these investors in the SPAC lined up, and then you had this great mentor who said, you need to back out of the deal. So you went back to those set of investors and said, would you like to be in this deal as now just private equity in the company and get out of the SPAC? You're coming with me and you're leaving the SPAC. Is that what happened?
No, we just broke the deal. I mean, because I'll give you an example. Let me say it sort of more generically, which is the vast majority of the investors in our pipe were public-only investors. So the second that we walked, they would not be investors in the company, period. And so we had a couple of cadres of investors, one who are taking from people who believe in your vision and saying, nah, you don't get the opportunity anymore, which is one of my favorite things to do, by the way. And then taking the investors who exist in the company, who've been there, they had to wait like a year for that. No. But take the existing investors and tell them, hey, this liquidity event that we were creating, it's not going to happen. So it's 2 pools, 2 messages. Yeah.
Great journey, love your whole story. Did I hear you say you started Jewel?
I did.
Tell me about that. Why?
No, not that Jewel.
Oh, thank God.
No. It took me a second. No, the company I started, I went through a little mental journey there when you said that, because there's 3 jewels that jump into my head. 1, the company that you're referring to, which I had nothing to do with. 2, the singer with the space between her teeth from like the aughts. And 3, the company that we did start, which was an energy company that was taking sunlight, CO2, salt water, and making diesel out of it. And that's the reason we started that was really around the whole social mission around climate change and whatnot. So very straightforward, having nothing to do with inhalables or anything like that. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned value drivers, expense management, fundraising the right amount, and you added team. On value drivers, what is the process that you use? First, I want to just thank you for this fabulous presentation. Love your sense of humor and the fact that there's structure around what you're saying. And so on the value drivers, after you've gone through that hypothesis and you've obviously failed to kill the company, right? So how then do these value drivers like bubble up from that challenge so that you know to focus on those? And do you pick maybe just 3? Do you pick just 1? How do you continue to winnow that down?
So first, it's 1 to 3. It's always 1 to 3. Can't be more than 3. Second, the way I've always figured these out, and this is not the popular answer that people want you to say, which is I get together with my team and we spend some time together and we figure it out. Because I can tell you, every time I've tried to do it with a team, it's a waste of time, right? Because everyone's trying to figure out, how does this help my part of the business, right? The way I do it, I have a chair in my office. I don't sit very often, but I have like a chair in my home office. And I usually just kind of sit there for like 15 minutes, and it's really clear what drives the company. Because part of the beauty of being the CEO, the blessing and the curse, is you see everything, right? So you're the only one with the complete picture. And to me, that gives you the opportunity to figure out what are those driving forces. But they may not be what you started the company with, right? And I think that's the really important part, because when you go through the company journey, our value drivers in the beginning we thought might be this. And I can tell you, when we started Valo, we thought they were going to be an ability to predict which clinical trials were going to succeed and which ones were not going to work. We figured out how to monetize that. But it turned out no one cared. And the reality is that can't be our value driver if no one cares. It doesn't make sense intuitively that no one cares. And I'm happy to get into details on it. But what we found out that people cared about was, how do they move fixed cost to variable cost? And it's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Whenever you fail to kill a company, did you ever find out that you were just hitting revenue targets, you could just simply do it all by yourself as a privately funded endeavor? Or did you always fall back on funding because it was just available? Or did you ever see the vision to simply do it privately all the way through?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, technically I grew up inside a venture fund, right? And so the job of venture funds is to return money to their investors. And so we have to seek exits. There is no long-term hold. When you look at the system that we created, even though I talked about creating a company, there's also a system about creating a return that's built into that. Because what I didn't tell you is we own 100% of the company after the Series A. And what that means is our returns are already 3 times better than a typical venture capitalist, who at the highest end might own 30% after an A. So that's really useful for us. But then we care about getting companies acquired or public from the venture capital side, again, because it's our business. So split incentives. And this, again, it gets back to, you have to have the right aligned incentive. If you want to build a company that you're sitting there running for 20, 30, 40 years, you don't want venture capital funding. It's the wrong thing to do. So there's no right or wrong answer on that. It's just for the model that I'm in, one, we need to engineer the exit. And two, now the reason I raise capital is because, to be honest, the scale of the business is one where we need the capital to operate there. And I believe we're in a winner-take-all market where you have to get the so-called flywheel moving, and the flywheel will get taken up very quickly if you don't move fast. So I've believed that you have to move exceptionally fast, which is why you need to make capital a resource as opposed to an obligation.
So you think like the blitz scaling for this specific time is the move?
Yeah, well, the biggest issue for us, to be honest, I'll be very explicit, the biggest issue for us in 2019 and 2020 was we needed access to data, right? And the data world was going to be played between 2019 and 2021. And we ended up cornering probably some of the most important data in the world during that period of time. Our data scale, like our competitors are Verily and some others, we probably have 1,000 times more data than Verily has. And when you're dealing with AI systems, which is what we deal with, that scale means everything. Sure, yeah, good.
So I think I know the answer that you're going to give to this question, but your 5x 3 years, does that include liquidity events?
No, it's just valuation, just valuation.
Not what I expected you to say.
Sorry. Yeah.
Quick question on that. When you mentioned the very impressive valuations you got, and you said you had no revenues. I'm just curious from your venture hat. I don't know how to articulate, but what are the building blocks for that valuation in terms of the drivers? And you'd say is it customer acquisition, or is it the IP? Which drivers really spike that and kind of build that pie together for valuation?
Let me give you two answers, one real and one fake. The fake is a detailed sum of the parts analysis that shows what the projections of every component of our business are that add up to a valuation. And the reality is I can tell you whatever valuation I'm trying to achieve, our sum of the parts are 2 to 3 times that. Whatever it is, that's always the magic. Real answer is FOMO. Nothing more, right? Which is you create a scarcity around your deal. And this is the art of doing the deal, which is I might share the deal with everyone, but I've been known to kick investors out of my office. I make investors come to me as opposed to traveling to investors. Usually they don't like it, but if you want in, that's the only way to get in. And I've kicked them out of my office when they start asking stupid questions or saying stupid things, right? So I had someone say to me in our last round, I don't believe in data. Yeah, it was like, the door's right there. Do you believe in doors? But it becomes really important because what happens when you do something like that. One, it's like what they show in these movies, like you kill everyone but one person so you can create the legend. Then it helps to create the scarcity factor, right? And I think that's really important because people don't want to invest in a deal that's easy to invest in. They want to invest in a deal where they think it's going to get away from them, and they think it's going to be moving so quickly in the future that if you don't get in now, they'll miss the opportunity later.
Thank you.
Sure.
A round of applause for David. Okay, so product panel, come on up. Everybody else stand up, stretch out, grab a coffee, and we're going to get started here in just a couple moments.
Thanks.
I want to have a chat.
Yeah.
I'm the other physician here.
Oh, nice.
I'm actually
Nice.
practicing orthopedics.
Oh, they didn't kick you out.
No, they didn't kick me out. I was in residency and all that. I've been practicing.